The gunshot echoed across the dusty streets of Willow Creek, Montana Territory, 1875, sending birds scattering from the weathered rooftops as Penelope Foster clutched her torn wedding invitation, her heart shattering as completely as the saloon window behind her. She traveled 1,000 miles for a wedding that would never happen, all because, as her intended had cruelly declared before the entire town, she was too big to be any man's proper bride. Xander Morgan lowered his smoking Colt revolver, the bullet he'd fired skyward still ringing in the air. He hadn't meant to arrive in town on the same day as this particular brand of public humiliation, but he'd be damned if he'd stand by while some Eastern dandy ridiculed a woman who'd clearly traveled far with nothing but hope in her heart. "That's enough," Xander called out, his voice carrying across the now silent Main Street. His tall frame, broad shoulders, and the unmistakable confidence of a man who'd survived the frontier commanded attention. The sun glinted off his dark beard, and his eyes, the color of a storm-laden sky, fixed on the well-dressed man who stood smugly on the boardwalk. "This ain't your business, cowboy," sneered Charles Whitfield, the banker's son who'd sent for Penelope only to reject her publicly. "You made it everyone's business when you decided to shame a lady in the middle of town," Xander replied, his hand still resting on his holstered gun. "Where I come from, a man keeps his word, especially to a woman he's asked to marry." Penelope stood frozen, tears streaming down her flushed cheeks. Her curves, which had been described as ample in her letters to Charles, were accentuated by the dusty traveling dress she wore. She was indeed taller and more substantial than the petite women of Willow Creek, but there was nothing about her that warranted such cruelty. "She misrepresented herself," Charles protested, gesturing dismissively. "Look at her, I can't be saddled with that." Xander's jaw tightened. "Miss," he said, addressing Penelope directly for the first time, "my ranch is 3 miles outside of town. You're welcome to stay there until you decide what to do next. No strings attached." Penelope wiped her tears with a handkerchief, her blue eyes wary. "I don't even know you, sir." "Xander Morgan," he replied with a slight tip of his hat. "Owner of the Starlight Ranch. Ask anyone in town about me." He paused, then added more softly, "No one should be left stranded with nowhere to go." Charles laughed derisively. "Taking in my leftovers, Morgan. Always knew you had poor taste." In 3 long strides, Xander crossed the distance between them and grabbed Charles by his expensive lapels. "One more word," he growled, "and you'll be picking your teeth up off this boardwalk." The crowd that had gathered murmured nervously, "Mrs." Holloway, the seamstress, stepped forward and put a comforting arm around Penelope. "Mr. Morgan is right, dear. You can't stay at the hotel now, it wouldn't be proper with all this gossip. I've known Xander since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. He's a good man." Penelope glanced between Charles, who couldn't even meet her gaze now, and the tall cowboy who'd come to her defense. There was something in Xander's eyes, not pity but genuine concern, that made her decision. "Thank you, Mr. Morgan," she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite her ordeal. "I accept your offer of temporary shelter." Xander nodded, releasing Charles with a warning look. "My wagon's out front. I'll take you to the ranch once you gather your things." An hour later, Penelope sat beside Xander on the bench of his wagon, her 2 trunks secured in the back. The town of Willow Creek grew smaller behind them as the horses pulled them toward the rolling hills beyond. "I don't know how to thank you," Penelope said quietly, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. "No need," Xander replied, keeping his eyes on the trail ahead. What Charles did wasn't right. A man's word should mean something. Penelope smoothed her skirts, acutely aware of how they spread across the bench. "He wasn't wrong, though. I am larger than most women." Xander's eyes flickered briefly to her before returning to the trail. "There's nothing wrong with how you look, Miss Foster. Some men just don't recognize real beauty when they see it." The simple statement, delivered without a hint of flirtation or pity, brought fresh tears to Penelope's eyes. She blinked them away, determined not to appear any more pitiful than she already had. "Have you lived in Montana Territory long?" she asked, changing the subject. "Born and raised," Xander answered. "My pa staked a claim here before the war, built the ranch from nothing." It's mine now after he passed 3 winters back. I'm sorry for your loss. Xander nodded his acknowledgement. What about you? Where do you call home? Philadelphia, Penelope replied. Though I don't have much to go back to. My parents are gone and I was working as a school teacher before. Her voice trailed off. Before you decided to marry a man you'd never met, Xander finished for her. Penelope's cheeks flushed. It sounds foolish when you say it that way. Not foolish, Xander corrected. Brave, takes courage to leave everything behind for a chance at happiness. The wagon crested a hill, and Penelope gasped at the vista that spread before them. The Starlight Ranch sat in a lush valley, with a sturdy 2-story house, a large barn, and several outbuildings. A creek glittered in the late afternoon sun, and cattle dotted the green pastures that stretched toward distant mountains. It's beautiful, she whispered. It's home, Xander said simply, a hint of pride in his voice. Not fancy, but it's peaceful. As they approached the ranch house, a middle-aged woman emerged from the front door, wiping her hands on her apron. That's Martha, Xander explained. She and her husband, Tobias, help me run the place. They live in the small cabin behind the main house. Martha greeted them warmly, her kind eyes taking in Penelope's tear-stained face without comment. Mr. Morgan sent word with young Billy about your arrival, she explained. I've prepared the guest room upstairs. Thank you, Penelope said, feeling suddenly overwhelmed by the kindness of strangers after the cruelty she'd experienced in town. Martha's the best cook in the territory, Xander said as he helped Penelope down from the wagon, and she doesn't take any nonsense from anyone, including me. Martha chuckled. Someone has to keep you in line, Mr. Morgan. Now come inside, both of you. Supper will be ready soon, and you must be famished after your journey, Miss Foster. The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly comfortable. Solid, well-crafted furniture, clean floors, and curtains at the windows gave it a homey feel that Penelope hadn't expected in a bachelor's residence. Her room was simple but pleasant, with a large bed covered in a colorful quilt, a washstand, and a small writing desk beneath the window. After freshening up and changing into a less travel-worn dress, Penelope joined Xander and Martha for a supper of savory beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie. Tobias, a quiet man with kind eyes, joined them briefly before heading back out to check on a mare about to foal. Miss Foster was a schoolteacher in Philadelphia, Xander mentioned as Martha served the pie. Is that so? Martha's eyes lit up. We've been trying to establish a proper school here for years. The closest one is in town, and it's too far for many of the children from outlying ranches. Penelope felt a small spark of interest, the first positive emotion since her humiliation earlier that day. There are enough children for a school, between the ranches and farms in this valley. Certainly, Martha replied. The Hendersons have 4, the Wilsons have 3, and there are at least a dozen others of school age within a reasonable distance. Martha, Xander cautioned, Miss Foster has just arrived. She probably hasn't made any decisions about staying in the territory. Of course, Martha said quickly. I didn't mean to presume. It's all right, Penelope assured them. It's actually nice to think I might have something to offer here. She hesitated, then added, though after today I'm not sure how welcome I'd be. Xander's expression darkened. Don't let Charles Whitfield and his snobbish friends make you feel unwelcome. They're not the heart of this community. That night, alone in her room, Penelope wrote in her journal by candlelight, trying to make sense of the day's events. She had arrived in Willow Creek full of hope, only to have those hopes dashed in the most public and humiliating way possible. Yet here she was, safe and comfortable in the home of a stranger who had defended her honor without hesitation. Xander Morgan puzzled her. He was nothing like the men she'd known in Philadelphia, not polished or particularly eloquent, but there was an integrity about him that she found compelling. And the way he looked at her, without the judgment or dismissal she'd grown accustomed to from men regarding her size, was refreshing. Still, she reminded herself, his offer was temporary. She would need to decide soon whether to return east in defeat or find a way to build a new life in this rugged territory. The next morning, Penelope woke to the unfamiliar sounds of a working ranch, the lowing of cattle, the neighing of horses, and the distant calls of cowboys. She dressed quickly in a practical day dress and made her way downstairs, where she found Martha preparing breakfast. "Good morning, Miss Foster," Martha greeted her cheerfully. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I expected," Penelope admitted. "And please call me Penelope." "Penelope it is then," Martha agreed, placing a plate of flapjacks on the table. "Mr. Morgan is out with the men, but he asked me to show you around the ranch when you're ready." After breakfast, Martha took Penelope on a tour of the immediate grounds. The barn was large and well-maintained, housing a dozen horses. The vegetable garden behind the house was thriving, and Martha spoke proudly of the root cellar stocked for the coming winter. "It must be a lot of work for you, managing the household alone," Penelope observed. Martha nodded. "It is, especially during roundup or when Mr. Morgan hosts the neighboring ranchers. An extra pair of hands would be welcome if you're offering." Penelope smiled. "I am. It's the least I can do in exchange for your hospitality." They were in the garden harvesting vegetables for the midday meal when Xander returned. He dismounted from his horse with the easy grace of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. His shirt was damp with sweat, and his face was dusty, but he smiled when he saw them. "Giving Miss Foster the grand tour?" he asked Martha. "Indeed," Martha replied. "And she's kindly offered to help with the house." "That's not necessary," Xander said quickly. "You're a guest, Miss Foster. Please call me Penelope," she insisted. "And I'd like to earn my keep while I'm here. I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Morgan." "Xander," he corrected with a slight smile. "And I never thought you were afraid of work. Just don't want you feeling obligated." Their eyes met briefly, and Penelope felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. There was something disarming about his direct gaze, as if he could see beyond the defensive walls she'd built over years of subtle and not-so-subtle rejections. The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Penelope helped Martha with household tasks and cooking, finding satisfaction in the physical work after years of teaching. She discovered that she enjoyed baking bread, the process of kneading dough somehow therapeutic. In the evenings, she often sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in spectacular colors. Xander typically worked from dawn till dusk, but he made a point of joining Penelope and Martha for the evening meal. His conversation was sparse but thoughtful, and Penelope found herself looking forward to those quiet dinners. A week after her arrival, Xander found Penelope in the garden, harvesting late summer tomatoes. "I'm heading into town for supplies," he said. "Thought you might want to come along." "Martha mentioned you needed some things." Penelope hesitated. The memory of her humiliation was still fresh, but she couldn't hide at the ranch forever. "Yes, thank you, I would like to go." The ride to town was pleasant, with Xander pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the area's history. Penelope found herself laughing at his dry humor, a welcome change from the tears that had marked her first visit to Willow Creek. As they approached the town, however, her anxiety returned. "Perhaps I should wait in the wagon while you conduct your business," she suggested. Xander's expression hardened slightly. "You have nothing to be ashamed of, Penelope. If anyone should be hiding their face in this town, it's Charles Whitfield." The main street was busy when they arrived, with horses tied at hitching posts and people moving between the various establishments. Xander helped Penelope down from the wagon, his hand lingering briefly on her waist. "I need to speak with the blacksmith," he said. "Would you like to visit the general store first?" "Yes, I think I will," Penelope replied, straightening her shoulders. As she crossed the street, she felt the stares of several townspeople. Some looked away quickly when she met their eyes, while others whispered behind their hands. She forced herself to walk with her head high, though her cheeks burned with embarrassment. In the general store, Mrs. Patterson, the proprietor's wife, greeted her with surprising warmth. "Miss Foster, isn't it? I'm glad to see you again. We were all horrified by how Charles treated you." Penelope managed a small smile. "Thank you for your kindness, Mrs. Patterson. Not at all, dear. Charles Whitfield thinks far too highly of himself, always has." Mrs. Patterson leaned closer and lowered her voice. "Between us, you're better off without him. Now, what can I help you with today?" Penelope gathered the few items she needed: thread, fabric for a new apron, and some writing paper. As she was paying, the door opened and a hush fell over the store. Charles Whitfield stood in the doorway, his expression darkening when he saw Penelope. "Still here, I see," he said coldly. "I would have thought you'd have slunk back east by now." Before Penelope could respond, Mrs. Patterson stepped forward. "Mr. Whitfield, I'll thank you to be civil in my establishment. Miss Foster is a customer here, same as you." Charles ignored her, his eyes fixed on Penelope. "I hear Morgan's taken you in. Always knew he had peculiar tastes." Penelope felt a rush of anger replace her embarrassment. "Mr. Morgan has shown me nothing but kindness and respect, which is more than I can say for you, Charles." "Respect?" Charles laughed. "Is that what they call it these days when a man takes in a—" He never finished his sentence. The door opened again, and Xander entered, his tall frame filling the doorway. The look in his eyes was dangerous as he assessed the situation. "Everything all right here, Penelope?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm. "Yes," she replied, gathering her purchases. "I was just leaving." Charles stepped aside with exaggerated courtesy. "By all means, don't let me keep you. I'm sure Morgan is eager to get you back to the ranch. Quite the cozy arrangement you've found." Xander moved with startling speed for a man his size. In an instant, he had Charles backed against the counter, one hand gripping the front of the banker's son's expensive shirt. "You're going to apologize to the lady," Xander said quietly, but the threat in his voice was unmistakable. "Take your hands off me, Morgan," Charles sputtered. "My father will—" "Your father isn't here," Xander interrupted. "It's just you and me, and I'm telling you to apologize to Miss Foster for insulting her virtue." The store had gone completely silent. Mrs. Patterson stood frozen behind the counter, and the few other customers watched with wide eyes. Charles glanced around, apparently hoping for support, but found none. "Fine," he muttered. "I apologize, Miss Foster." "Like you mean it," Xander insisted, not releasing his grip. Charles swallowed hard. "I sincerely apologize for my remarks, Miss Foster. They were uncalled for." Xander released him with a slight shove. "There, was that so hard?" Penelope had watched the exchange with a mixture of gratitude and dismay. While she appreciated Xander standing up for her, she worried that his actions would only fuel the town's gossip. "Thank you, Mr. Whitfield," she said formally. "I accept your apology." Then, turning to Xander, she added, "Shall we go? I believe we have everything we need." Outside, Xander helped her into the wagon, his movements gentle despite the anger still evident in his face. "I'm sorry about that," he said as he climbed up beside her. "I shouldn't have left you alone." "You can't protect me from every unkind word, Xander," Penelope replied softly, "and confrontations like that only give people more to talk about." Xander's jaw tightened. "I don't give a damn what they talk about. No one has the right to question your character." They rode in silence for a while, the tension gradually easing as the town receded behind them. Finally, Penelope spoke. "Thank you for defending me, even if I wish it hadn't been necessary." Xander glanced at her, his expression softening. "You're welcome, though I'm not sure I did you any favors by making a scene." "Perhaps not," she admitted with a small smile, but it was rather satisfying to see Charles so discomfited. Xander chuckled, the sound warming something inside her. "He did look a bit like a fish out of water, didn't he?" Their laughter faded into a comfortable silence as they continued toward the ranch. Penelope found herself studying Xander's profile, the strong line of his jaw beneath his beard, the slight crinkles around his eyes that suggested he smiled more than she'd initially thought. "Martha tells me you've been a big help around the house," Xander said after a while. "I've enjoyed it," Penelope replied honestly. "It's different from teaching, but satisfying in its own way." "Speaking of teaching," Xander began, seeming slightly hesitant, "I've been thinking about what Martha said about a school for the Valley children." Penelope's interest piqued. "Oh. There's an old cabin on my property, about a half-mile from the main house. It would need work, but it could be converted into a schoolhouse." He glanced at her. "If you were interested in staying and teaching, that is." The offer caught Penelope by surprise. "You do that for children who aren't even yours." "Education matters," Xander said simply. "My pa made sure I learned my letters and numbers, even when we were just scraping by. Not all the ranchers and farmers around here can do the same for their children." "That's Remarkably generous of you, Penelope said, touched by his concern for the community. Xander shrugged, looking slightly uncomfortable with her praise. Just practical. Valley needs a school and you need a purpose. Seems like a good match. The idea took root in Penelope's mind as they continued toward the ranch. Teaching again, building something meaningful in this new place, it was an appealing prospect. And it would give her a reason to stay in Montana that had nothing to do with her failed engagement or her current dependence on Xander's hospitality. By the time they reached the ranch, Penelope had made up her mind. "I'd like to see this cabin," she told Xander as he helped her down from the wagon. "If it could truly be converted into a school, I would be very interested in teaching there." The smile that lit Xander's face made her heart skip a beat. "We'll ride out tomorrow then," he promised. "If you're sure." "I am," Penelope replied, finding that she meant it completely. That evening, as they sat on the porch after dinner, watching the stars emerge in the vast Montana sky, Penelope felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced since arriving in the territory. "It's so different from Philadelphia," she mused. "There, the buildings block most of the sky and the gas lamps obscure the stars. Can't imagine living somewhere you can't see the stars," Xander replied, his voice low and contemplative. "My mother used to say they were windows into heaven, where the angels looked down on us." "That's beautiful," Penelope said, surprised by the poetic sentiment from the typically pragmatic cowboy. "You don't speak of your mother often." "She died when I was 12, Xander explained. "Fever took her one winter. Pa and I managed, but it was never the same without her." "I'm sorry," Penelope said softly. "My mother passed when I was 18. My father followed 3 years later." Xander nodded his understanding. "Makes you grow up fast, losing parents." The shared experience of loss created a new bond between them, a quiet understanding that needed no further words. They sat in companionable silence until Martha called them in for tea. The next morning, Xander saddled 2 horses after breakfast. "The cabin's not far, but it's easier to reach on horseback than by wagon," he explained. Penelope eyed the horse dubiously. "I haven't ridden in years and never very well." "Daisy here is gentle as a lamb," Xander assured her, patting the dappled mare's neck, "and I'll be right beside you." With some trepidation, Penelope allowed Xander to help her mount. The side saddle felt precarious at first, but Daisy stood patiently as she adjusted her skirts and found her balance. "There you go," Xander encouraged, mounting his own horse with practiced ease. "Just hold the reins loosely and let her follow my horse. She knows the way." They rode at a leisurely pace, following a well-worn trail that wound through stands of pine trees. The morning was crisp and clear, with the scent of pine and wildflowers filling the air. Gradually, Penelope relaxed into the rhythm of the horse's gait, even beginning to enjoy the experience. "You're a natural," Xander commented, glancing back at her. Penelope laughed. "Hardly, but Daisy is very forgiving of my mistakes." They emerged from the trees into a small clearing where a log cabin stood, weathered but solid. A creek gurgled nearby and wildflowers dotted the surrounding meadow. "It's lovely," Penelope breathed, taking in the picturesque setting. Xander dismounted and helped her down, his hands strong and sure at her waist. "The cabin was built by the first foreman my father hired. He moved on years ago and it's been empty since. Needs work, but the structure is sound." The interior was dusty but surprisingly spacious, with 2 rooms and a stone fireplace. Windows on 3 sides would provide ample light, and the creek nearby solved the water issue. "The main room could hold desks for the students," Penelope said, already envisioning the space as a classroom. "The smaller room could be a library or supply storage." Xander watched her with a hint of a smile. "You can already see it, can't you?" "I can," she admitted. "It would need cleaning, repairs, furniture, but it has real potential." "I'll have my men start work on it tomorrow if you're certain," Xander offered. Penelope turned to him, suddenly overwhelmed by his generosity. "Why are you doing all this for me? You hardly know me." Xander's eyes held her steadily. "I know enough. I know you're kind, hardworking, and resilient. I know you didn't deserve what happened in town, and I know the children around here would benefit from your teaching." He paused, then added more quietly, "And I know I've enjoyed having you at the ranch more than I expected to." The simple honesty of his words touched Penelope deeply. There was no artifice to Xander Morgan, no hidden agenda she could detect. He saw a need and moved to fill it, whether that need was a stranded bride-to-be or education for local children. "Thank you," she said softly. "I accept your offer, and I'll do my best to create a good school here." The ride back to the ranch was filled with plans for the school, what supplies they would need, how word would be spread to the neighboring ranches and farms, when classes might begin. Penelope felt a sense of purpose returning, the humiliation of her failed engagement receding in the face of this new challenge. That evening, Martha was ecstatic about the school plans. "It's just what this valley needs," she declared as she served beef stew for dinner. "And what you need too, I think, Penelope." "It is," Penelope agreed. "I've missed teaching more than I realized." "I'll send Tobias to town tomorrow to order lumber for repairs and desks," Xander said, "and I'll have a couple of the hands start cleaning the place up." "I want to help with the cleaning," Penelope insisted. "It will be my school after all." Xander looked like he might protest, but then nodded. "Fair enough. We can ride out again the day after tomorrow, once the initial clearing is done." Over the next 2 weeks, the transformation of the old cabin into a schoolhouse became a community project. Word spread quickly, and soon ranchers and farmers were stopping by to offer help or materials. The Hendersons donated a large slate board, the Wilsons brought a beautifully crafted teacher's desk, and Mrs. Patterson from the general store sent a box of primers and chalk. Penelope threw herself into the work, cleaning, organizing, and planning lessons. She spent hours in the cabin, making it ready for students, often with Xander working alongside her, repairing windows or building shelves. She came to appreciate his quiet competence, the way his large hands could perform delicate repairs with surprising gentleness. And sometimes, when she looked up from her work, she would catch him watching her with an expression that made her heart flutter. News of the school also brought Penelope into greater contact with the valley's residents, many of whom greeted her warmly and expressed their gratitude for her willingness to teach their children. To her surprise, her size, which had been such an issue for Charles, was never mentioned or seemed to matter to these practical frontier families. 3 weeks after the project began, the schoolhouse was ready. A hand-painted sign reading Starlight Valley School hung above the door, and 10 simple but sturdy desks filled the main room. Bookshelves, still only partially filled, lined one wall, and a pot-bellied stove stood ready for the coming colder weather. The evening before the school was to open, Xander and Penelope stood in the doorway, surveying their work with satisfaction. "It's perfect," Penelope said, her voice thick with emotion. "I can't believe how much has been accomplished in such a short time." "People come together for what matters," Xander replied, "and education matters to folks around here, even if many of them didn't get much schooling themselves." Penelope turned to him, overwhelmed with gratitude. "None of this would have happened without you, Xander. You've given me a new beginning when I thought everything was lost." Xander's eyes softened as they met hers. "You did the same for me in a way." "What do you mean?" He gestured toward the schoolhouse. "This place has been empty for years. The ranch has been just work since my pa died. Having you here, seeing your excitement about teaching, about building something new, it's reminded me there's more to life than just getting by." The sincerity in his voice moved her deeply. Without thinking, Penelope reached up and placed her hand against his bearded cheek. Xander went still, his eyes never leaving hers. For a moment she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he gently took her hand from his face and pressed a kiss to her palm, a gesture so unexpectedly tender that tears sprang to her eyes. "We should head back," he said softly. "You have a big day tomorrow." The ride back to the ranch was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. Penelope's hand still tingled where Xander's lips had touched it, and her mind whirled with emotions she hadn't expected to feel again after Charles's rejection. Could Xander truly be attracted to her? The possibility seemed both wonderful and terrifying. She had come to care for him deeply, his integrity, his quiet strength, his unexpected gentleness. But the memory of public humiliation was still raw, and the thought of risking her heart again was frightening. The school's opening day dawned clear and bright. 15 children, ranging in age from 6 to 16, arrived with their parents, all curious and excited about the new school and its Eastern teacher. Penelope greeted each child by name, having meticulously studied the roster she and Martha had compiled. Xander stayed for the opening ceremony, but then discreetly withdrew, leaving Penelope to establish her authority with her new pupils. By midday, when the children broke for lunch in the meadow, Penelope felt the familiar joy of teaching returning. These children were eager to learn, respectful and refreshingly direct in their questions and observations. In the days that followed, Penelope settled into a new routine. She rode to the schoolhouse each morning, taught until mid-afternoon, and then returned to help Martha with dinner preparations. Xander often met her on the trail back to the ranch, timing his own return from working with the cattle to coincide with hers. These rides became precious moments for conversation, away from Martha's well-meaning but watchful eye. Penelope learned about Xander's dreams for the ranch, his concerns about the coming winter, his fondness for poetry that he tried to conceal beneath a practical exterior. In turn, she shared stories of her life in Philadelphia, her love of teaching, and gradually, her insecurities about her appearance that had plagued her since childhood. "I've always been bigger than other girls," she confessed one afternoon as they rode side by side. "Taller, more substantial. My mother said I was statuesque, but the other children were less kind." Xander was quiet for a moment before responding. "People fear what's different sometimes, doesn't make them right." "Charles certainly didn't think I was right," Penelope said, the hurt still evident in her voice despite her efforts to move past it. "Charles is a fool," Xander replied with unexpected vehemence. "A man who can't see your beauty doesn't deserve to stand in your shadow." The simple declaration, delivered without embellishment or flattery, struck Penelope speechless. She stared at Xander, who seemed almost embarrassed by his outburst. "I just mean," he continued more quietly, "that there's nothing wrong with how you look. Some men prefer women who aren't breakable as china dolls. Men like you," Penelope asked before she could stop herself. Xander's eyes met hers, and the intensity there made her breath catch. "Yes," he said simply, "men like me." The admission hung between them, changing something fundamental in their relationship. Neither spoke of it directly in the days that followed, but there was a new awareness, a tension that was both exhilarating and unsettling. As October arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and hints of the harsh winter to come, preparations for the annual Harvest Festival began in Willow Creek. Martha informed Penelope that the festival was the social event of the season, with dancing, food, and competitions drawing people from all the surrounding areas. "You'll need a new dress," Martha declared one evening as they cleared the dinner dishes. "Something special." Penelope hesitated. "I'm not sure I should attend, after what happened with Charles." "Nonsense," Martha replied firmly. "You're the Valley's teacher now, respected by everyone who matters. Besides," she added with a knowing look, "I think Mr. Morgan would be sorely disappointed if you didn't go." Xander, who had been quietly smoking his pipe by the fire, looked up at the mention of his name. "Martha's right," he said. "You should go. Show the town you're not hiding from anyone." And so, 2 days before the festival, Penelope found herself in Mrs. Holloway's dress shop in town, being fitted for a new gown. The seamstress had created a design that flattered Penelope's fuller figure, with a deep burgundy fabric that complemented her fair complexion and dark blonde hair. "You look beautiful, my dear, Mrs. Holloway said as Penelope turned before the mirror. "Truly regal." For the first time in a long while, Penelope looked at her reflection and didn't immediately notice her size. Instead, she saw the becoming color against her skin, the way the bodice accentuated her small waist before flaring into the full skirt, the sparkle that had returned to her blue eyes. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "It's perfect." The day of the Harvest Festival arrived with clear skies and crisp autumn air. The town square had been transformed with hay bales, colorful bunting, and tables laden with food contributed by families from miles around. A platform had been erected for the musicians, and lanterns were strung overhead, ready to illuminate the festivities once darkness fell. Xander drove Penelope, Martha, and Tobias into town in the wagon, himself uncharacteristically dressed in a clean shirt, vest, and his best boots. His dark hair was neatly combed and his beard trimmed. The sight of him, handsome and slightly uncomfortable in his formal attire, made Penelope's heart race. "You look very nice," she told him quietly as he helped her down from the wagon. "So do you," he replied, his eyes taking in her new dress with evident appreciation. "That color suits you." Martha and Tobias discreetly moved ahead, leaving them alone for a moment. Xander offered his arm. "Shall we?" Penelope placed her hand on his arm, feeling the solid muscle beneath the fabric of his shirt. "I'm a bit nervous," she admitted. "This is my first public appearance since." "You have nothing to be nervous about," Xander assured her. "You're the teacher now, a respected member of the community." And he added with a hint of steel in his voice, "You're with me." The festival was in full swing when they arrived. Children raced about playing games, women compared preserves and baked goods at the judging tables, and men gathered to discuss cattle prices and the coming winter. The atmosphere was jovial and welcoming. To Penelope's relief, most people greeted her warmly, many introducing themselves as parents of her students and expressing gratitude for the school. If there were whispers or sidelong glances, they were few and easily ignored with Xander's steady presence beside her. They were sampling Mrs. Wilson's prize-winning apple pie when Charles Whitfield approached, his mother on his arm. Mrs. Whitfield, a thin woman with pinched features, regarded Penelope with barely concealed disdain. "Miss Foster," Charles said stiffly. "Mother, this is Miss Foster, the new teacher at the Valley School." "How?" "Interesting," Mrs. Whitfield replied, her tone suggesting it was anything but. "I wasn't aware we needed another school in the area. The children are thriving under Miss Foster's instruction," Xander said, his hand coming to rest protectively at the small of Penelope's back. "Enrollment has already grown to 22. Mrs. Whitfield's gaze flicked dismissively over Penelope. "Well, I suppose some form of education is better than none for the rancher's children." Penelope felt Xander tense beside her but spoke before he could respond. "Every child deserves quality education, Mrs. Whitfield, regardless of their background. I'm proud to provide that at Starlight Valley School." Charles looked uncomfortable, but his mother merely sniffed. "Yes, well, we must be moving on. So many people to greet." She tugged at her son's arm, leading him away without a proper farewell. "That woman," Xander muttered, watching them go, "has a heart as cold as a Montana January." Penelope couldn't help but laugh at his assessment. "She's just protecting her son. I imagine she was as horrified by my appearance as Charles was." "Then they're both blind as well as foolish," Xander replied, his hand still warm against her back. "Come on, I hear the music starting. Let's see what else this festival has to offer." As evening fell, lanterns were lit, casting a golden glow over the square. The band struck up a lively tune and couples began to form for dancing. Penelope watched, enjoying the music and the sight of families coming together in celebration. "Would you care to dance?" Xander asked, extending his hand. Penelope hesitated. "I'm not sure that's wise, I'm rather noticeable on a dance floor." "Good," Xander replied with unexpected firmness. "Let them notice. Let them see what Charles was too foolish to value." His confidence bolstered hers and Penelope placed her hand in his. "Very well, Mr. Morgan, lead the way." Xander led her to the edge of the dance area, where they joined the circle of couples moving to the music. He was a surprisingly graceful dancer for such a large man, guiding her with gentle pressure at her waist. Penelope, who had always felt awkward and conspicuous at Philadelphia socials, found herself relaxing into the simple joy of the movement. They danced 3 songs in succession, laughing as they navigated the increasingly complex patterns called by the fiddle player. When they finally stepped aside to catch their breath, Penelope noticed several approving glances from the older women watching from the sidelines. "I think you've won over the town matriarchs," Xander murmured close to her ear. "Mrs. Henderson just gave me a very definite nod of approval." Penelope felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "For my dancing skills, I hope." "For everything about you," Xander replied, his voice low and sincere. The moment was interrupted by one of Penelope's students, young Emma Wilson, who approached with a cup of cider. "For you, Miss Foster," she said shyly. "Ma says you must be thirsty after all that dancing." "Thank you, Emma," Penelope replied, genuinely touched by the gesture. "That's very thoughtful." As the evening progressed, Penelope found herself surrounded by well-wishers and parents eager to discuss their children's progress at school. Xander remained nearby, occasionally bringing her refreshments or introducing her to ranchers from further afield who hadn't yet met the new teacher. It was near midnight when they finally departed, Penelope pleasantly exhausted from dancing and conversation. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, with Martha and Tobias dozing against each other on the back seat of the wagon. "Thank you for tonight," Penelope said softly to Xander. "I never expected to enjoy myself so much." "You deserved it," he replied simply. "And I think you laid some ghosts to rest." "Perhaps I did," she agreed, thinking of how differently the townspeople had treated her compared to her first disastrous day in Willow Creek. "Though I suspect having you as my escort made a significant difference." "Don't sell yourself short," Xander countered. "They respect you for who you are and what you've done with the school. I just provided the initial introduction." The wagon crested the final hill before the ranch, and they could see the house below, a lone lamp burning in the kitchen window. The night was clear, with stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. "It feels like home now," Penelope said, the realization striking her suddenly. "I can't imagine being anywhere else." Xander's eyes, silvered by moonlight, found hers. "I'm glad," he said softly. "I can't imagine this place without you anymore." The admission hung between them, full of promise and possibility. Penelope's heart raced as Xander's hand found hers in the darkness, his rough palm warm against her skin. Neither spoke again until they reached the ranch, but their clasped hands said everything necessary. November brought the first snowfall, transforming the valley into a winter wonderland. Penelope continued to teach, with the children now arriving at the schoolhouse on sleds or snowshoes. Xander had the foresight to stock the school's woodshed abundantly, ensuring the building remained warm despite the plummeting temperatures. One particularly cold afternoon, Xander arrived at the schoolhouse earlier than usual, just as Penelope was dismissing her students for the day. "Storm's coming," he explained as the last child departed. "Wanted to make sure you got home safely." Penelope looked out the window at the darkening sky. "It seemed fine when we started this morning." "Weather changes fast in Montana," Xander replied, helping her into her heavy coat. "Best not to take chances." They secured the schoolhouse and set out for the ranch, the horses moving cautiously through the deepening snow. The wind had picked up, driving icy particles against their faces and reducing visibility. "Should we have stayed at the schoolhouse?" Penelope asked, raising her voice to be heard above the wind. "We're closer to the ranch than the school now," Xander called back. "We'll make it." The storm intensified with alarming speed, the gentle snowfall becoming a howling blizzard within minutes. Xander moved his horse closer to Penelope's, taking Daisy's reins from her numbing fingers. "Stay close," he shouted. "The horses know the way," Penelope nodded, unable to speak through the scarf wrapped around her lower face. The cold was penetrating her layers of clothing, and she could no longer feel her toes or fingertips. The world had narrowed to white fury, with nothing visible beyond a few feet in any direction. After what seemed like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, Xander pulled the horses to a halt. "We need shelter," he yelled. "The line shack is close." Penelope had no idea what a line shack was but trusted Xander's judgment implicitly. He led the horses off the main trail, following some path only he could perceive in the blinding snow. Finally, a dark shape materialized before them, a small, sturdy cabin half buried in a snowdrift. Xander dismounted quickly and helped Penelope down, her legs so stiff with cold that she nearly collapsed. He half carried her to the cabin door, kicked it open, and brought her inside while the wind howled around them. "I need to see to the horses," he said, settling her on a rough wooden bench. "There's a small lean to where they'll be sheltered. Will you be all right for a few minutes?" Penelope nodded, teeth chattering too hard for speech. Xander squeezed her shoulder reassuringly and disappeared back into the storm, closing the door firmly behind him. The interior of the line shack was Spartan but functional, a small space with a wood stove, a narrow cot against one wall, a crude table and 2 chairs, and shelves stocked with basic provisions. It was cold but blessedly free from the driving wind. By the time Xander returned, Penelope had managed to remove her snow-covered outer garments and was attempting to light the stove with shaking hands. "Here, let me," Xander said, taking the matches. He efficiently built a fire in the stove, the small flames quickly growing as they consumed the dry kindling. "The horses are settled," he reported, removing his own snow-crusted coat and hat. "They'll be fine until the storm passes. How long do you think that will be?" Penelope asked, huddling close to the stove as warmth began to radiate from it. Xander grimaced. "Hard to say. Could be hours, could be a day or more. These early winter storms can be unpredictable." The implication of his words sank in slowly. "We might be here overnight." "We might," Xander confirmed, his expression concerned. "I'm sorry, Penelope. I should have heeded the signs earlier and not let school continue today." "It's not your fault," she assured him. "None of us expected the storm to arrive so quickly." As feeling returned to her extremities, bringing painful tingles, Penelope became aware of their situation's potential impropriety. Alone in a remote cabin, possibly overnight, it was hardly the proper circumstance for an unmarried woman and man. Xander seemed to read her thoughts. "Martha and Tobias will know where we are," he said. "They'll understand we had no choice. Your reputation won't suffer." "I'm more concerned about surviving than about my reputation at the moment," Penelope replied with a small smile, "but thank you for the reassurance." The cabin gradually warmed as the stove worked its magic. Xander inventoried the supplies: coffee, beans, jerky, flour, and a small supply of canned goods. There was also a barrel of water, partially frozen but still usable. "We won't go hungry," he said, setting a pot of water on the stove to heat. Line shacks are kept stocked for exactly this kind of situation. As the day progressed into evening, the storm showed no signs of abating. Wind screamed around the cabin's eaves and snow piled against the single window until no light penetrated. Inside, however, it was surprisingly cozy. They shared a simple meal of beans and jerky, with hot coffee to warm them from within. "This reminds me of when I was a boy," Xander said as they sat at the small table. "My pa and I got caught in a storm like this once while checking on strays." "Spent 3 days in a line shack very much like this one." 3 days, Penelope echoed, alarmed. Xander smiled reassuringly. "That was unusual. Most likely we'll be able to head back tomorrow or the next day at latest." As night fell, the temperature outside plummeted further, and despite the stove's efforts, the cabin grew chilly again. Xander added more wood to the fire, but it was clear that conserving their fuel would be necessary if the storm continued. "You should take the cot," Xander said, eyeing the narrow bed. "I'll be fine on the floor near the stove." Penelope looked at the thin mattress, then at the hard wooden floor. "That doesn't seem fair. You'll freeze." "I've slept in worse conditions," he assured her. "At least take one of the blankets," she insisted, pulling one from the cot. "I can manage with the other." Xander accepted the blanket with a nod of thanks. They prepared for sleep awkwardly, both acutely aware of the intimacy forced upon them by circumstance. Penelope removed only her boots before lying down on the cot, pulling the remaining blanket tightly around her. Xander extinguished the lantern, leaving only the red glow from the stove to illuminate the small space. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded Penelope. The cot was uncomfortable, the cabin creaked and groaned under the storm's assault, and most distractingly, she was intensely aware of Xander's presence just a few feet away. His breathing had not yet settled into the rhythm of sleep, telling her that he too was awake. "Xander," she said softly. Thank you for coming to find me today. I might have tried to make it back to the schoolhouse on my own and gotten lost." There was a rustle as he shifted on his makeshift bed. "You're welcome, though I wish I'd arrived sooner before the storm hit so hard." Silence fell between them again, but it was a companionable silence. The wind continued to howl, but inside their shelter there was warmth and safety. "Penelope," Xander's voice came from the darkness. Yes, I'm glad you stayed in Montana. Even with everything that happened with Charles, I'm glad you didn't go back east. The simple honesty of his statement touched her deeply. So am I, she replied. I've found purpose here and friendship, and she hesitated, uncertain how to express the growing feelings she had for him. And he prompted gently, and a sense of belonging I never had in Philadelphia, she finished, choosing the safer response. Xander was quiet for so long that Penelope thought he might have fallen asleep. Then he spoke, his voice low and serious. When you first arrived in Willow Creek, I saw a woman who'd been wronged, who needed help. I offered you shelter because it was the right thing to do. He paused. But these past months, watching you build the school, seeing your kindness with the children, your strength in facing down gossip and prejudice, I've come to admire you more than any woman I've ever known. Penelope's heart raced at his words. Xander, you don't have to say anything, he interrupted quickly. I just wanted you to know, whatever you decide to do when spring comes, stay or go back east, I'll support your choice. The selflessness of his declaration moved her deeply. Here was a man who wanted her happiness above his own desires, who saw her value when others had dismissed her. I'm not going anywhere, she said firmly. My life is here now, my school, my students. She took a deep breath. And you, if you'll have me. The floorboards creaked as Xander sat up. In the dim light from the stove, Penelope could see his silhouette, powerful and somehow vulnerable at the same time. If I'll have you, he repeated, his voice rough with emotion. Penelope, you're everything I never knew I wanted. Strong, beautiful, kind. The thought of you leaving has been keeping me awake at night for weeks. Penelope sat up as well, the blanket falling from her shoulders. Then ask me to stay, Xander, not just as your guest or your friend, but as something more. Xander moved to kneel beside the cot, taking her hands in his. Stay with me, Penelope, be my wife. Let me spend the rest of my life showing you how a woman should be cherished. Tears sprang to Penelope's eyes at the sincerity in his voice. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll stay, I'll be your wife. Xander's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb gently wiping away a tear. May I kiss you? He asked, his voice husky. In answer, Penelope leaned forward, closing the distance between them. Their lips met tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. His beard was soft against her skin, and his arms, when they encircled her, were strong and secure. The kiss deepened, expressing months of unspoken longing and newly declared love. When they finally parted, both were breathless. I should. Xander began, gesturing toward his place by the stove. Stay, Penelope said, making room on the narrow cot. Just to sleep, she added quickly. But I don't want to be apart from you tonight. Xander hesitated only briefly before joining her on the cot. It was a tight fit, necessitating that they lie pressed together, her back to his chest, his arm around her waist. They pulled both blankets over them, creating a cocoon of warmth against the raging storm. Is this all right? He murmured, his breath warm against her hair. Perfect, she replied, feeling safer and more content than she ever had. Outside, the blizzard continued its fury, but inside the small cabin, Penelope and Xander had found a haven of warmth and love that would endure long after the storm had passed. The blizzard raged for 2 full days, keeping them confined to the lined shack. They passed the time talking, planning their future together, and sharing the simple intimacy of 2 people deeply in love. Xander told stories of his childhood on the ranch, and Penelope shared her dreams for expanding the school as the valley grew. By the morning of the 3rd day, the storm had exhausted itself. They emerged from the cabin to find the world transformed. Snow lay in drifts taller than a man in some places, while in others, the relentless wind had scoured the ground nearly bare. The sky was a brilliant, clear blue, and the sun reflecting off the snow was almost blindingly bright. It's beautiful, Penelope breathed, momentarily forgetting the danger the storm had presented. Beautiful but treacherous, Xander replied, surveying the altered landscape. We'll need to be careful heading back to the ranch. Martha and Tobias must be worried sick. They were right to be concerned. When they finally reached the ranch after a slow, careful journey, they found Martha pacing the porch anxiously. She rushed to meet them as they approached. Thank the Lord, she exclaimed, embracing Penelope tightly. We've been beside ourselves with worry. Tobias tried to reach the line shack yesterday but couldn't get through the drifts. We're fine, Xander assured her, dismounting and helping Penelope down from her horse. The line shack was well stocked and we stayed warm enough. Martha's sharp eyes noted something different between them, a new ease and intimacy. Well, she said, her expression softening, it seems you did more than just stay warm, if I'm not mistaken. Penelope blushed, but Xander grinned unabashedly. You're not mistaken, he confirmed. I've asked Penelope to be my wife, and she's agreed. Martha's delighted cry brought Tobias running from the barn. The news was shared again, followed by congratulations and Martha's immediate shift to planning mode. A Christmas wedding would be lovely, she declared as they entered the warm kitchen. That gives us just over a month to prepare. Christmas, Penelope echoed, somewhat overwhelmed by the sudden timeline. Xander squeezed her hand reassuringly. Only if that's what you want. We can wait until spring if you prefer. Penelope considered briefly, then shook her head. No, Christmas would be perfect. Why wait when we're sure of our hearts? Word of their engagement spread quickly through the valley, bringing a stream of well-wishers to the ranch. The school children were especially excited, peppering Penelope with questions about the wedding and whether she would continue teaching afterward. Of course I'll still be your teacher, she assured them. Being Mrs. Morgan won't change that. To Penelope's surprise, even some of the townspeople who had witnessed her humiliation at Charles's hands now approached her with genuine congratulations. Mrs. Patterson from the general store insisted on ordering special fabric from Helena for Penelope's wedding dress, and Mrs. Holloway offered to sew it as her wedding gift. Something befitting your stature, Mrs. Holloway said firmly. You're a natural beauty, my dear, and your wedding dress should celebrate that, not hide it. The weeks leading up to Christmas were a whirlwind of preparations. The ranch house was thoroughly cleaned. Evergreen boughs and red ribbons decorated every available surface, and Martha baked enough to feed half the territory. Penelope divided her time between teaching, wedding preparations, and blissful evening hours with Xander, planning their future together. We should expand the house come spring, Xander suggested one evening as they sat before the fire. Add a proper study for you and perhaps a few more bedrooms. A few? Penelope queried with a raised eyebrow. Xander smiled, taking her hand. I was thinking 3 or 4 might be good. For the children we might have. The casual mention of children of a family together filled Penelope with joy. I'd like that, she said softly. Very much. The dress, when it was finished, brought tears to Penelope's eyes. Mrs. Holloway had created a gown of ivory satin and lace that emphasized Penelope's womanly curves without attempting to minimize them. The bodice was intricately embroidered, and the full skirt fell in elegant folds from her waist. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever worn, Penelope told the seamstress, turning before the mirror in wonder. As it should be, Mrs. Holloway replied with satisfaction. You're a beautiful bride, my dear. Christmas Eve dawned clear and cold, with fresh snow blanketing the valley like a wedding gift from nature itself. The small church in Willow Creek was decorated with pine boughs and candles, and by midday it was filled to capacity with ranchers, farmers, townspeople, and most importantly, Penelope's students, all dressed in their Sunday best. Xander waited at the altar, looking uncharacteristically nervous in his new suit. When the church doors opened and Penelope appeared on Tobias's arm, the older man having offered to give her away, a collective murmur of appreciation ran through the congregation. Penelope moved down the aisle with grace and confidence, her eyes fixed on Xander. The months of hardship, of rebuilding her life from the ashes of rejection, seemed worth every moment as she approached the man who had seen her true worth from the beginning. When Tobias placed her hand in Xander's, Penelope felt a sense of rightness, of coming home. The minister's words washed over her as Xander's eyes held hers, full of love and promise. I, Xander James Morgan, take thee, Penelope Ann Foster, to be my lawfully wedded wife. His voice was clear and unwavering, carrying to the farthest corners of the church. When it was her turn, Penelope spoke with equal certainty. pledging her love and fidelity to the man who had defended her with both his words and actions. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." Xander's kiss was gentle but possessive, a public declaration of his love and commitment. When they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Morgan, the applause was thunderous. The celebration afterward at the Starlight Ranch lasted well into the night. Tables groaned under the weight of food, musicians played lively tunes for dancing, and even the children were allowed to stay up far past their usual bedtimes for this special occasion. Charles Whitfield and his mother were conspicuously absent, but Penelope found she didn't care. The people who mattered were all present: her students and their families, the neighbors who had helped build her schoolhouse, and most importantly, her new husband, who barely left her side throughout the festivities. As midnight approached, Xander led Penelope away from the crowded main room to a quiet corner of the porch. The night was clear, stars brilliant above the snow-covered landscape. "Happy?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Completely," she replied, leaning back against his chest. "I never imagined I could be this happy." "You deserve it," Xander said, pressing a kiss to her temple, "every bit of it and more." They stood in comfortable silence, watching their guests through the windows, the warm light spilling out onto the snow, creating a golden tableau of community and celebration. "Charles did me a favor, in a way," Penelope mused. "If he hadn't rejected me so publicly, you might never have stepped in, and I wouldn't be here now as your wife." Xander turned her in his arms, his expression serious. "I like to think we would have found each other anyway. Some things are meant to be. You're a romantic at heart, Mr. Morgan," Penelope teased, reaching up to touch his bearded cheek. "Only for you, Mrs. Morgan," he replied, lowering his mouth to hers for a kiss that promised a lifetime of love and happiness. 5 years later, Penelope stood on that same porch, watching as Xander taught their 4-year-old son, James, to ride his first pony. Their 2-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, clung to Penelope's skirts, her dark curls so like her father's blowing in the gentle spring breeze. The Starlight Ranch had prospered under their joint stewardship. The house had been expanded as planned, with a wing for the children and a study where Penelope prepared lessons and managed the ranch accounts. The school had grown as well, with a second teacher now helping Penelope manage the increasing number of students. Willow Creek had changed too. The railroad had finally reached the town, bringing new settlers and opportunities. Charles Whitfield had moved to Helena after his father's death, leaving the bank in more capable hands. The town rarely spoke of the public rejection that had once been the talk of every household, except occasionally as a cautionary tale about missing what was right before your eyes. "Mama, look." James called, sitting proudly on his pony as Xander led it in a circle. "I'm riding." "I see you, darling," Penelope called back, her heart full of pride. "You're doing wonderfully." Xander looked up, catching her eye with a smile that still made her pulse quicken after all these years. His love had never wavered, his admiration for her only growing as they built their life together. As Elizabeth tugged at her skirt, demanding to ride too, Penelope scooped up her daughter and descended the porch steps to join her family. The Montana sun was warm on her face, the future stretching before them as vast and promising as the territory itself. She had come west seeking a husband and found instead a true partner, a man who valued her for exactly who she was. Xander had not only taken in a bride rejected for being too big, but had defended her with his life and his love, showing her and everyone else that true beauty came in all sizes, and that real love saw beyond the surface to the heart beneath. And in that understanding, they had built a life more fulfilling than either could have imagined alone, a testament to the power of love to transform rejection into redemption and strangers into family.